Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Seaman. I am the host of Get Hired and the editor behind the Get Hired newsletter. Thank you so much for joining us today again on Get Hired Live. It's hopefully you are well and safe wherever you are in the world. And today we have a great discussion coming up. We're going to be answering your questions. But as always, I want to start like we always do. I want you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about where you're from and what you're looking for in the job market. So in the comments, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us if you're looking for work in a new field, in the same field, what you're looking for, and then also connect with each other. So maybe you're in the space industry or aerospace industry or aviation, and you see someone else who's looking in that area. Connect and job search together, swap resumes, look for critiques. Some of the best comments that I get from people after these shows is that they're learning from each other and people are meeting afterward to sort of work together to find work. It could be a lonely process to be a job seeker, so think about that going forward if you can do that. But as always, once you introduce yourself, get your questions in, and we'll be taking those in just a bit. But today I want to bring in our guest who is coming to us from the South. She is Jena.
Hi there.
Hi, she is the founder of Recruit the Employer. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh gosh, thank you for having me. I love this show. And so it was a super big honor to hear from you and get to be on it.
Fantastic. It was an honor to have you. And I guess the first question I have is, can you explain where you came up with the concept for Recruit the Employer? Because when I read that, it made me pause and I'm like, oh, that is a great concept.
Yeah. So I have worked one-on-one with career coaching clients, people in 9-to-5 jobs who are looking to transition. And for me, I realized that there was a lot of things that a lot of people were kind of struggling with. And so I realized the biggest thing was people were not taking ownership of their job search. And so the whole concept behind Recruit the Employer is to get employees and candidates to take back control of the job search process. And so I created this program that all has a personal branding approach to the job search process.
I think that's fantastic because, what a lot of people forget about, especially when they're job seekers, they think they're in a weaker position than recruiters, but in reality, it's an economy. They have something that you want, you have something that they want. So it's finding sort of that equal exchange to land yourself in a good spot. So it's one of those things where it's sort of turning the traditional idea of recruitment on its head. And I think that's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah. And, and sort of starting out, I wanted to talk a little bit about job search strategy, because one thing that we always talk about in terms of job seeking is that you shouldn't just do it sort of willy-nilly. You shouldn't just get laid off, or you shouldn't just say, I'm done with this job, I want a different one, and start applying a bunch of places. Why is that? Why should a job seeker have a job search strategy?
Number one reason, to keep your sanity. I think that's the number one reason. I think beyond that, of your own mindset and keeping yourself sane during this process that can be very, very stressful, is to bring some structure to your search. If you don't have structure to your search, you're going to not know exactly what you have to offer. And also by not knowing exactly what you have to offer, you don't know how to sell yourself. So by bringing some structure to your job search and knowing exactly what you're going for, all of your marketing materials will actually go towards that one idea and that one type of job that you are applying for. So bringing some structure is going to bring you some sanity.
Yes. And I think a lot of people think that it's a numbers game when it comes to job searching, when in reality, you're probably going to lose at the game because the house always wins in that case. You're going to be sending out like 200 resumes, 200
It's exhausting.
Yeah. And if you focus on quality over quantity, you're probably going to yield better results.
Yeah.
And for a person who say, okay, well, I need a strategy, but how do I start? What would your recommendation be for that? How can a person create a job search strategy?
So I think first you have to identify what is your secret sauce and like, how do you think? I think that's part of the process. So part of it, and what I feel like is the easiest way to start thinking about your job search strategy for 9 out of 10 people in the way that they process information, the way that they organize things, is to simplify it for yourself. So my recommendation actually is to, instead of scrolling through LinkedIn on all the different jobs that could be really, really overwhelming, my recommendation for somebody just starting out is to pick 5 companies that they're really interested in working for, look at their careers page or their LinkedIn page to see what jobs they have available, and start actually prioritizing those positions first to apply to, and then start to build upon that. So it's more taking a company first approach versus a job first approach.
And that's fantastic advice. And I think, for anyone watching, I think a good thing to do is if you want to share your strategies with anyone, put them in the comments. Tell us if there's something that you've done during your job search that you've found really effective. Maybe we could read some of those a little bit later. And we have so many people joining us. I want to say hi to Hugo from Mexico City, Scott from Texas, Colleen from New York City. I'm waving to you from my apartment. Colleen, Andrea from Florida, and Danielle from Virginia. Welcome to everyone who's joining us. And how about we take some questions?
Sounds great.
Great. Well, let's start off with one that came in beforehand. And I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with. I've struggled with this in the past, and it's from Kanai. And Kanai asks, how quickly after an interview should you send a thank you note?
Great question. So my recommendation is you should give about 24 hours. So within the first 24 hours, you should be sending a thank you note to all the participants in that interview. So if you had a panel interview, yes, I would recommend sending an email thank you to each person on that panel and make it customized, right? The best way to be memorable, the best way to land the job is to be memorable. So one of the best ways to be memorable is to provide a customized thank you note. And I would do that within 24 hours of that last interview.
But and I think one thing that I've always thought was really great advice too is that when you send a thank you note, mention something that you took away from the interview. So if someone mentions something, say, hey, I know you said X, Y, and Z, so I really took that to heart and I did, A, B, C. That way they knew you were listening. And I think that's always better than just the, hey, thanks for meeting me. Have a nice day.
Yeah. And even if let's say, for instance, you're in that interview and you get asked a really hard question that you don't in that moment know the answer to, and you say, to be perfectly honest, I'm not quite sure on that. Can I get back to you afterwards? That is your opportunity also in the thank you note to provide clarity to anything that you said, to follow up and to provide value. So it's kind of a all-in-one opportunity to still sell yourself in the process.
Yeah. And a related question that came in from Jennifer is, when do you follow up with an employer if you haven't heard back?
Oh gosh, this is a tough one. I think a lot of people get a lot of anxiety around this one of do I respond in a couple of days? Do I respond in 2 weeks? What's too long? I usually recommend to most of my clients, give it about a week, unless they have given you very specific instructions on when they are going to reach out to you. I would wait about a week. And then I would follow up and say, hey, just wanted to follow up to understand what next steps of that process, the interview process, looks like. Beyond that, I usually say if you really feel compelled, you can continue to follow up. But I would say that first follow-up should really be within that first week. Anything longer than that may be forgetful, right? They may have forgotten about you. And anything before that might be a little bit too soon, but always default to when they said that they were going to reach out first.
Got it. And when do you think people should, and I know it's going to sound bad, give up? Because there's going to be a lot of times when they don't hear back.
I think it really depends on the individual. Honestly, I've seen instances where people were pleasantly persistent for a really long time and kept putting themselves in front of somebody and it worked out. And I've seen instances where it hasn't worked out. So I don't think I have a hard and fast rule on that one. But I would say that whatever you feel comfortable with, and if you really believe that you can provide value for that organization, if you are going to follow up multiple times, I would be really clear on the value that you're bringing each time, or to come at it with, hey, I've been thinking a little bit about what your XYZ strategy is. I have a couple of ideas, would love the opportunity to be able to speak with your team again. So you can do some things to make it a little bit more customized and to, again, continue to sell yourself. I know I sound like a broken record, but
no. It's fantastic advice. And then Bree has a question about sort of the flip side. So hi, thanks for watching, Bree, first of all. What is the best way to connect with people on LinkedIn who work at a company that you want to work for?
This is my favorite topic of conversation. So I love this one. First of all, I appreciate your boldness because I think a lot of people are scared or have this really scared feeling about reaching out to somebody that they don't know. I will tell you that for myself in my own career, I worked on Wall Street. I made some pretty big pivots in my own career. I got all of my jobs through networking. So I know that this strategy will work if you put enough time and effort into it. So my recommendation typically is to find, based off the job description, who the hiring manager may be. An easy way maybe to do this is if they actually tell you the title in the job description. If they don't tell you the job title in the job description of who you'll be reporting to, my best answer for that is to try to do some sleuthing on LinkedIn and figure out who the right person is. Once you find that individual, I would write them a really quick email. You can take two approaches. What I call the the pitching approach where you share, hey, I noticed you have XYZ position available. Here's how I believe, I'll keep this short and sweet. Here's how I believe I can bring value to your team based off that job description. Would you be open to having a conversation next week and providing 3 things? That's like the hard pitch. If you want to go a little softer of a route, what you could do is you could reach out and say, hey, I really love what your company is doing. We're both in the similar industry. I'd be interested in learning more about your experience at XYZ company. Would you be interested? No pressure if not. Hopping on the phone for 10 to 15 minutes. I have 3 questions I want to ask you. So what that framework does is it helps you be very clear on what you want, very clear on what you're going to ask. Don't ever show up to a networking conversation without kind of those really strong questions that you want to ask, and be gracious and realize that they are busy people too. And so saying no pressure if this is not within your wheelhouse, no big deal. It allows people to say no graciously as well.
Yeah, I think that is one of the best pieces of advice, which is be specific with your questions.
Yes.
As someone who's a journalist and has talked to a lot of up and coming journalists, I always tell them, don't ask broad questions. Otherwise, you're going to get really broad answers. If you need to know something, you need to specifically ask about that. And you also, the person you're talking to feels like they're really giving you benefit and you're not wasting their time. So that's one of those things that I think is so crucial, is just be specific with your questions. Don't just sort of sit down and be like, tell me about
yourself.
Yeah.
It's like the worst way.
Yeah. And they're going to assume that you didn't do homework to find basic information and that they want you to start from scratch. So I think that's fantastic. And then another question that came in, and I always try and like to talk about this, is Betsy, who's watching us from Canada. So hello, Betsy. What do you recommend for dealing with ageism? Should I add dates to my education portion?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of schools of thought. I feel like don't stress yourself out about it. Here's my first answer. Don't stress yourself out about it. I have seen more commonly to not put the dates on your past college experience. If you put it on, is it the end of the world? No, because at the end of the day, you want to be a part of a company that values all of the amazing experience that you've had over the years. And if they're not picking up your resume because they've figured out your age, do you really want to work for that company? So my personal recommendation is do whatever you feel comfortable with. We often will take off the years, for a client potentially on their resume for their most past experiences, just to kind of make sure that doesn't become an issue. But my personal opinion is that, hey, if you put it on and the company doesn't want to hire you because of that, you didn't want to work for them anyways.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? I'm curious.
Well, I think it depends on the person.
Yeah.
My biggest advice is don't be ashamed of your age.
Yes.
And to have a good attitude about it. One thing that I was taught going back to journalism is when I was young, I did an internship. I was basically a perennial intern for USA Today in the United States. And I had to ask people their ages for every story I did. And growing up, my mother had always told me, do not ask women their age. So it was always sort of very hesitant for me because it was ingrained, like, don't ask people their age. Yeah. But what I found is that if you ask people and you act as, okay, this is not something to be ashamed of, they're not ashamed. And I think that goes the opposite way too. If you are okay with your age, if you're confident in what you are, and you project that, it sort of tells the other person that they should be confident about it, accept it. So I think that's something that is good whenever you feel maybe some inadequacy about anything about you, is that if you're okay with it, if you're confident, it's going to project onto the other person. So I think that's usually my best advice for people. I
agree with everything you said. I think that's even applicable when I hear people talk about gaps in their resume. And I said, it's not an issue if you don't see it being an issue, right? If there's a small gap, maybe you went on a sabbatical, maybe you were unemployed. For you to share that when somebody asks you that question in an interview, to be confident in your rationale as to why you took that break, to own it, to not lie about it, and kind of move forward and share again how you can bring value to that company. Same thing holds true.
Got it. And we have a question here from Shauna, and this is interesting. Hello, Shauna. What questions do you have for industry agnostic folks who are open to multiple companies? That's interesting. So I think that's probably someone who maybe doesn't have a clear industry they want to go into. And I think that could be probably someone who is maybe an accountant. You can be an accountant for many different industries. So, what would your advice be for Shauna?
Maybe I need a little bit more clarity on the question. And the job search strategy, is that what we're talking about here?
Yes.
Or
okay. Yep, so it looks like she would like to apply to different companies in different industries.
Yeah. So I would say it really comes down to, I mean, go for it, right? Go for it, right? The biggest thing that you have to remind yourself of is what value do you have to bring to the table? And you're right. If you're, let's say, an accountant and it doesn't really matter what industry you're a part of, I would just be very, very clear about picking an industry and then picking multiple industries after that. So what I mean is, if let's say you're finding a lot of companies in, let's say, the retail industry, for instance, I would pick 3 companies within there to help you with your job search and then move on to another industry. It's all about keeping yourself structured in that process. So the same instance that you would maybe pick 5 companies, maybe you want to pick 5 industries and look within those industries. Anything to make it more simple for you in your job search. So I hope I answered that question.
And I see in the comments someone named Shauna said yes, so I'm hoping that that worked for her.
Awesome.
So Shauna, it helped Shauna, and I think that's the best we could hope for in that case. And this is a question that I'm interested to hear about because I'm actually writing about this for the upcoming edition of Get Hired, which is from Sarab. How to clear the application tracking system automated rejection. I think this is something that a lot of people face, and I think a lot of people don't know about ATS systems.
Yeah. So a lot of companies, most companies use applicant tracking systems. Most companies use different applicant tracking systems. So one of the ways, if you do get a rejection and if you feel like, I don't think I should have gotten that rejection, I've actually had a client recently who got rejected from the applicant tracking system. She went and found somebody on LinkedIn that worked for that company, reached out to them and asked kind of, hey, I applied to this job. I got rejected. Here's how I think I can bring value. Would love to hear if you have any feedback for me. So she was really bold in her outreach. And the person asked if she wanted to have an interview. So that's one way to get around it. I think the number one thing that I'm seeing, especially now across the board, how to get around the applicant tracking systems is to not solely rely on them. So what a lot of people are doing right now is they're spending about 80% of their time on the job search platforms and applying online through the applicant tracking systems. And about 20% of their time they're spending networking. I want you to flip it. I want you to spend 80% of your time connecting with real humans on LinkedIn, easiest way to start there. And then 20% of your time applying through the applicant tracking systems. And both of those things together will help bolster your search.
I think that's great advice, and because it's part of the strategy of being a job searcher is that you have to network, but then also if you do it properly and you sort of schedule your routine, that 20% is those quality applications that you're submitting and really putting time and effort in, hoping to improve your odds instead of just sending out like 100 a week.
Yeah. It's going to be exhausted doing that. It's actually much more fun to connect with real humans and not just a computer screen and potentially rejection email. I know for myself in my own personal career, I applied, I was moving from the New York Stock Exchange and I was applying to this really small company at the time called themuse.com. And I applied online and they rejected my resume. And I said, well, forget this. I'm going to find a way to get around this applicant tracking system. And I hunted down someone who knew someone who knew someone who knew the CEO. And I got my resume in front of her and they brought me in and they hired me. So I can assure you, even if you have gotten rejected, there are workarounds. There are workarounds.
Yes, there always are. And we have some questions too related to ATS systems, kind of, which is about cover letters. It's cover letters are a weird
controversial.
Yeah. So we have a question from Christina and a question from Janice, but I think they could go together, which is basically how important are cover letters and should you add one if it's optional?
So I kind of liken this to maybe your college applications. When you have that like bonus feature, like optional things you can add if you want to, you probably always added them because you wanted to get into that school. So if you really want the job, I would recommend doing a cover letter. You should always be doing a cover letter if they require it, obviously. And you should also always be doing a cover letter if you are a career changer. So if you're trying to make a pivot that doesn't really make a lot of sense through your resume, the cover letter is an opportunity for you to tell your story in a more 3D way than your resume does, and to help connect the dots for that future employer as to why you want to make this pivot and why it makes sense. So overall, I would say if you want the job, do the cover letter.
Yes. And I think my piece of advice for Christina and Janice and anyone watching is make the cover letter count if you're going to do one.
Yes.
Because as someone who's gone through applications before and have read them, it takes on the employer side to open different documents in the ATS system or to open them. It takes a little bit of effort. So there's nothing less discouraging when you go through the struggle of opening a document on a computer, and then you see one line that says, "Please consider me for this position," and then that's it.
Yeah.
So make it count.
make it entertaining.
Yeah, make it worth the effort to open your document and print it out. I think
creativity is welcome. It's welcome.
Yeah.
I think that's a great place for you to show your creativity, especially if you're any profession where you have to do any writing. Cover letters are your opportunity to shine. Use it for your advantage. Don't think of it as some terrible thing.
Yes. And we have a question that I think is really interesting coming from Audra. Hi, Audra, first of all, and I'm sorry that you're going through this, which is what should you do if you keep getting furloughed, then brought back, and then furloughed again? Do you start looking for another job? And I think there's probably a lot of people that find themselves in this situation now that the virus is sort of going through these
iterations
and valleys. Yeah.
Yeah, that first of all, I agree with you. I'm so sorry that that's happening for you. That's an emotional roller coaster. Everything that's going on in the world is an emotional roller coaster. Add in stress at work, add in the being furloughed and not furloughed. It feels like you're on this. Yeah, it's just very stressful. So I want to say that I'm sorry that that's happening to you. My recommendation is to start looking. I think it's better to hedge your bets than to assume that your job will still be there. Now, that sounds scary, and I don't mean that to sound like doom and gloom, but I think there is a practicality of being proactive. And that's what we talk a lot about in my program, as I mentioned before, but it's all about being proactive in your job search, because this is something that my dad told me, and I will share it with you. And this is kind of painful to hear, but when I was thinking about leaving my first job, investment banking, that was really, really tough emotionally for me. He said, and I felt guilty about it. I felt guilty about leaving and searching elsewhere. And I know I hear that from a lot of people. And he said to me, Jena, a company is only going to be as loyal to you as what makes financial sense for them. And sometimes that's the cost of business. So I'm going to encourage you to take back control of your career and to actually start that process of looking, because you're going to feel more empowered, you're going to feel safer, and you're just going to be more excited about your future instead of wondering.
Yeah. And I think also if you are, especially if you're in sort of the cycle of being furloughed and then being brought back, you have not severed those ties to the employers yet. So it's a good time to do the prep work to do a job search. So you can get your yearly reviews printed out if they were positive, emails from your manager if they say, hey, great work on this, you increased sales this much. That's stuff that you want to keep in a file. I have one here just for myself, even at LinkedIn.
Your work wins.
So yeah, my work wins. That's actually not the file. I need to find it. But just have them handy, because you never know when you actually do need them. So that's something that is good to have on hand. And then we have a question here that's actually a great question. So thank you to Kendette for putting it out there. How do you address the salary question? I made a large salary and I'm not expecting the same. However, I feel that when they ask me, I get disqualified.
So I think one of the best ways is to try to punt that conversation as long as possible. That's my first recommendation. You want to really understand what the job is about. So when you get that question up front, sometimes it's a little bit hard for you as the candidate to really give an honest answer, which is, I'm sure, why you're asking this question. So I recommend always giving a range, maybe about 20K range of what you're interested in, but always say, but I'm flexible depending on my understanding of the responsibility and the role that this role has. So it's all about being clear that, hey, this is my range of what I would like, but I'm willing to be flexible if it's for the right opportunity at the right company. And it sounds like this company is a really great opportunity. Would you be willing to have more conversations around this? So it's putting out the elephant in the room, giving a range, not solidifying one specific number, but allowing yourself to understand what that job actually entails so that potentially you can negotiate that later on.
And also, I think what's important, especially now, because what tends to happen when we go through recessions is that it sets people back in their pay and salary trajectory, and that can be really detrimental across a career. So, do your homework and find out what you're worth. And if, you're a salesperson and you got laid off from a job, you're getting a very healthy paycheck, and now they want to hire you at a substantial loss. You don't want to be hired and then have everyone around you at the same level getting paid substantially more just because you were hired during a recession. So you need to really do your homework and know your worth, especially when you're going in there, because when they say, they're going to basically ask you to justify your worth, and you're going to have to. So I think that's one of the best things to do, is do your homework too.
Yeah. And I would encourage people too. I've worked with a lot of clients recently who have all actually negotiated their salaries during COVID, negotiated their salaries and are making more money than their past experience. So there is still hope that, if there seems to be across the board that you're not getting the salary that you want, there may be an opportunity down the road also to negotiate later.
Yeah. And we have a question from Charlene. This is something that a lot of people have been asking. Been laid off due to COVID-19. Should this be on my resume to directly address what I'm looking for, or for why I'm looking for a new job?
Here's my answer. I don't think you need to bring up an elephant in the room unless it's brought up. So a lot of employers are understanding why people are in between jobs right now. It makes sense. So if you get asked, hey, are you not still at that company? And you say no, and you explain why, that's your opportunity live in person. I don't think it's necessary for you to write on your resume, let go because of COVID. I think a lot of organizations understand that that's kind of the subtext. And if they call it out specifically in an interview, then of course you can talk about it.
Yeah. And I think also, I keep saying this, and I hope it's correct down the road, which is if someone sees that you were laid off in March of 2020 or any time between then and
we're like,
now,
oh, that's it.
Yeah, they're going to assume they know the reason. And I hope that is. If not, have them call me and I'll tell them. And another thing that came up, and it's a great question once I find it again. It's from Shamika. Shamika, I think you are in a spot where a lot of people are, which is, how do I pivot? How do I decide which industry is best for your next move?
Yeah, that's a lot of soul searching. I would recommend first and foremost to really understand, what do I want? So this is a great opportunity. I'm seeing a lot of people right now who are using this time to pivot in their careers, to think about a different move in their career. So my recommendation first is to really spend some time asking the question, what do I actually want in my career? What do I want to say at my retirement party that I worked on? What projects? How do I want to have impacted people? This is the time to be asking those questions. And once you get clarity on what you want, you can then understand the value that you bring. So first, you have to understand what you want. Second, you need to understand what skills do you have to offer to the marketplace. And then where those two things combine is where you can start to identify what are the different pivot points for you. So I know for myself, when I was making a massive pivot a couple of years ago, I realized on Wall Street that I was really bad at finance. Y'all, that is a bad place to realize that you're bad at finance. But I started to evaluate and ask those questions of, what did I want? What was my lifestyle I wanted associated with that? What types of industries did I want to be a part of? I had to get clear first before I could start pitching myself. And so I did that work, and then it helped me identify, hey, I want to be a part of a startup. I want to be in sales. Let me start making some motions towards that pivot story so that I can sell myself internally at an interview.
Yeah. And I think one of the best pieces of advice, and I've heard this from a few people, and I think hopefully not incorrectly, I'm not saying this incorrectly, is Jeff Weiner, who used to be our CEO at LinkedIn, talked a lot about sort of having a vision, having sort of this mission of your life. So if you want to really help educate the world and unlock opportunities for people, it doesn't mean you have to go to another country and work in a small school. It could be working in sales for a company that works toward that or something. So if you have that guiding mission of like, when I'm done with my life, this is what I want to leave behind, that can sort of push you in the right direction, at least give you that, oh, I should look in this way. And it's even okay if you just say, I want to provide for my family.
So there's no shame in that at all.
And there's so many different things about just sort of, what do I need to get out of life? And I think that is one of those things where it's like, you have a guiding light moving forward. And then we have a sort of a follow-up question here from Heather. And does that change for people who've been in another industry for a long time? She says, what is the best strategy to get noticed by recruiters when trying to change industries after a long career?
Yeah. So I think part of it comes back to, I know I sound maybe like a little bit like a broken record, but understanding what value you have to offer to that new industry. So it all comes back to, what do I have to offer? What are the skills that I have, and how does that translate to a new industry? So part of it could look like you proactively reaching out to these recruiters and not just waiting for them to potentially identify you. It's for you being proactive and making that case for that pivot and helping them realize why it's actually really beneficial that you are switching industries and the knowledge that you're bringing from an old industry into the new industry. What I often tell my clients is whatever you think is an objection potentially of why someone wouldn't hire you, think about the opposite. Think about why that's actually your advantage that you have these skills moving to and from industry to industry, and maybe don't think of them just as a disadvantage.
Yeah. And I think we have time for one more question. And I want to take this one from Liliana because I think a lot of people experience this, which is, what do you do when you send a resume to a great fit position and we hear nothing from the employer? Should we send our resume again? I think a lot of people sort of experience that of not hearing
The
back.
crickets. You're like, I prayed to the recruiting gods. Why did my resume not get picked up?
Yes.
So my recommendation to that is, again, goes back to networking. You should really try and find if there's some way for you to meet someone at that company. Leverage your network. To break networking down, at the end of the day, networking is just mutually beneficial professional relationships developed over time. And so if you're starting to build up those relationships, one of the biggest recommendations I have if you get rejected is to find a new relationship to build. And so finding someone at that company to potentially have a conversation with, and then potentially also reapplying via the applicant tracking system. You can reapply. Does that mean it's going to necessarily work? I don't know the answer to that. Every applicant tracking system and company is different. What I would recommend is get in touch with the person as soon as possible.
Yes. And I think also a big piece of advice, which also works in people's love lives too, is don't fall in love until, you actually have a commitment. So one of those things is that people often, they find a job that they think they're going to be great at, and they'll say, hey, there's no way I could be turned down for this position. They get wrapped up. They actually fall behind in their job search. So until you have that offer letter, don't picture yourself in that role, succeeding and falling in love with it, because they may have, there's so many variables and it may pass you by. So just keep going.
Yes, just keep going. Keep that. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, organizing your search. So if you're prioritizing opportunities, you're going to be able to just identify what's the next one on the list and keep going until you get that marriage certificate.
Definitely. And thank you so much, Jena. I appreciate you being here. If everyone who's been watching, if you notice at the bottom of the screen, every once in a while, we've been putting up Jena's LinkedIn address. So make sure you're following her for great content. And also, don't go too far. We'll be back Monday. My colleague, who's one of my favorite people in the world, Susie Jackson, will be here. She'll be talking to Olympic officials, sharing some insights about what's happening during the pandemic. The Olympics were supposed to be starting soon. That's going to be a great show. And then I'll be back here on Friday with another edition of Get Hired Live. My guest will be Letitia Bird, who is a talent development and career consultant. So be here for that. And I can't wait to see you. Until then, be sure to stay safe, be well, follow all of the recommendations of your local health officials, because you can only get hired. You can only be a good candidate for a job if you're well enough to do so. So until then, good luck and be safe.